This topic I'm going to cover in 12 minutes. Normally it represents about a 4-hour, very nuanced conversation. So I'm going to put my email at the end. Normally I'd say let's have a conversation, but to keep us on time, we're just going to kind of plow through it, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm just going to really talk, back in February, Leidos, Dell, Intel, some of the other biggers, along with the CDC, kind of said, uh-oh. And we saw what was going on with the virus. And so we started building out and prepping it. And we're doing a lot about, return to work. So I'm going to talk a lot about, general issues with COVID, return to work. I think something that's on a lot of people's mind is the liability from onward transmission in occupational setting. Talk about testing, vaccines, and then how Leidos, which is a large company with offices all over the world, is doing our return to work and risk mitigation. So the first topic, as I mentioned, general issues with return to work. And, no politics in this, no red, no blue, no nothing. The lack of clear and consistent messaging and guidance and regulation has really left a lot of jurisdictions and employers really on their own with what to do about return to work, about increasing occupancy, and, what do you do when someone gets sick? How do you take care of them? How do you bring them back to duty? And we'll talk about this more at the end, but, like I said, how do you increase occupancy? You're spending, Leidos spends tens of millions of dollars on space. How do we get that space back, under use? If someone goes out sick, what do? How do you bring them back to work? How do you make sure they're taken care of? And then how do you deal with the potential for onward transmission in the workplace? And the first thing that, comes up in all my conversations, all my leadership, is the liability. Liability from onward transmission of COVID-19 in a workplace setting is not settled. And it's not going to be settled until it's tested in court. I'm sure that most of the people on this on this call have seen class actions are being filed, for death and disability. But more broadly worrisome is the potential risk to the corporate brand for being perceived as someone who put their employees at risk and other things like that. That negative publicity around a failed or unfortunate experience in a return to work situation. Big unknowns right now. OSHA and the EEOC, they've not weighed in fully. But, in our evaluation, the potential of fines from both of those organizations for a not well done return to work is very high. And again, no politics, no red, no blue. The election is going to determine, have a significant impact on their future position on this issue, because this isn't going away before November. This isn't going away before January. And then, interestingly, unions and employee rights groups, they're kind of actually at odds with themselves. So back at the beginning of this, we were working with a major automotive manufacturer, I won't name them, and we came up with a beautiful system to allow them to achieve 100% occupancy, but we were going to track everyone. So we were going to know who was close to who at all times. And so that way, if someone got sick, we could just say, okay, these 14 people, they need to stay home. And they looked at us like we had lost our mind because there was no way that was ever going to happen. But on the other side, the unions and the employee rights groups were also screaming, you've got to protect our employees. We've got to be safe. We've got to get back to work. So it's a weird dynamic right now. But, the liability is something that you can mitigate. Testing. Current tests, they're not cutting it. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. You can get a test today. They're slow. They're costly. You can get tested today, and in 4 days, you'll come back negative because you were below the threshold of detection, but you're already symptomatic. So I have a lot of really heated arguments about the value of testing. Still need to test. Rapid tests, a lot of things going around rapid testing. That presents a challenge though, because these tests, yes, they take 10 minutes, but they're only 85% accurate. So that's leading to the potential for a lot of false senses of security. But on the other side of that coin, there's a lot of proponents of the fast, cheap, frequent, and crappy testing platform. What we're really looking at is the second generation of tests that are currently in EUA evaluation and pre-EUA. They have the potential to be as accurate as the high-end PCR tests, 98% plus, but they represent both a cost and time burden on par with a Starbucks run. So about 3 minutes of your life and under $15. And so that's starting to get into some really interesting conversations about, saturation testing floors, especially in like the executive corridors, where if you want to push the button to go up to the C-suites, everyone on those floors and everyone with access to those floors is tested all the time. So that is a full occupancy, return to work, maskless meeting environment through testing. And at, Starbucks money, that actually becomes tractable. For a more mass, there's some very interesting sensor platforms that are worth a look, with black body radiation and contactless oxygen saturation testing and things, where you can do, open the doors to your building and just everyone passes through a metal detector looking device, and anybody who turns red, you send home. Anybody who turns yellow, or who gets the yellow button, you make a decision on, but everyone who's green just keeps going back to their desk. Vaccine and natural immunity. And again, this is normally a multi-hour conversation. It's important to note all the vaccines being considered for Operation Warp Speed, they are 50 to 70% effective, which means a significant portion of the people who get them will have no benefit. And even those who do get benefit, potential protective levels of antibodies could wane after just a few months. So you may need another one 3-6 months later. And adverse event profile of these vaccines, if these were traditional candidates, the FDA would just assume that you were not being serious because there's no way they'd be approved. Even in people who are COVID survivors, their antibodies wane. It's not all doom and gloom. There are some really good vaccines coming, advanced adjuvants, T-cell epitopes, and things where they've changed the epitope profile to have no or little potential for non-neutralizing antibody development. And then can you go to the next slide? Kelsey, thank you. How Leidos is dealing with this. So Leidos is dealing with our return to work and mitigation. We worked with the CDC, we've worked with Dell and Intel, who are major employers. We're trying to harmonize with them. But through working with CDC and public health officials, we've been able to mitigate risk, daily self-assessments with some teeth, consistent processes for exceptions, and just all the things that it takes, and we're keeping it cheap. A couple of dollars a month per employee to potentially stave off tens of millions of dollars in liability or hundreds of millions of dollars of loss in revenue or lost time. And with that, can we go to the last slide? Like I said, I'd love, I'm going to put my email up here. I'll give you my phone number. I'd love to, if anyone's interested, it's a very passionate thing. I've spent the last many months of my life focusing on how we can safely and cost effectively return to work. So with that, I thank you, and please feel free to reach out.